Hello students, how have you been doing at home? I hope you are staying safe and sound. Today we'll still be looking at another topic in economics titled inflation. In our last class, we are able to treat taxation. We treated the types of taxation, the meaning of taxation, importance of taxation, systems of taxation, and the rest of them. Today we are going to be looking at inflation. I know that this is a popular topic that you've been hearing about. Inflation, you've been hearing increase in price and the rest of them. Before we go ahead with the topic, we are going to look at the specific objectives, what we are going to achieve by the end of this lesson. By the end of this lesson, the students will be able to define inflation. You state the types and causes of inflation. Secondly, you state the effects of inflation. What effect does it have in the nation, on the individual, in the lives of the businessmen and women? What effect does inflation have on them? Then the last one, the measures to control inflation. These are the things we are going to be treating today. Then what is inflation? When you talk about inflation, it is a period of persistent increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. A period of continuous increase. It means that the increase should be what? Consistent. Is consistent, is continuous. From 5 naira, you now have 10 naira, 15 naira, and so on and so forth. It is a period of what? Consistent increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. Now, during the time of inflation, there is what we call fall in the value of what? Money. The value of money, that is the quantity of goods and services a particular amount of money can buy, we do what? Reduce. That is what we mean by it needs to fall in the value of money. Let's take for instance, if you can ask your parents at home, there was a time in this nation whereby you can purchase a cup of rice for 10 naira. But if you go to the market now, a cup of rice, foreign rice, costs 120 naira. That is fall in the value of what? Money. So when you talk about fall in the value of money, the quantity of goods and services a particular amount of money can purchase, we do what? We reduce. So in the olden days, you can purchase a cup of rice for 10 naira, but now you purchase a cup of rice for what? 120 naira. So if it were in the olden days, with your 120 naira, you'll be able to purchase 12 cups of rice. But today, that 120 naira will only purchase 1 cup of rice. That's what we mean by fall in the value of what? Money. Now let's look at the types of inflation. Types of inflation. We have the cost push inflation, open inflation, and demand pull inflation. Cost push inflation, open inflation, and demand pull inflation. Let's look at cost push inflation. This type of inflation occurs when there is increase in the cost of what? Production or factors of production. What do you mean by that? Let's say, what do you mean by cost of factors of production? Those things that we use in what? Producing a particular good or what? Services. Let's say, for instance, if you are to bake cake, you have the raw materials like flour, sugar, butter, and so on and so forth. If the cost of purchasing these raw materials is high, definitely after producing the cake, what happens? The price of cake will do what? Rise. That's what I mean by cost push inflation. It occurs when there is increase in the cost of what? Production or factors of production. You now see that this increase in the cost of what? Production will be passed to the consumer in form of what? Higher prices. So if actually you are to purchase that product at the price of 5,000, because of the increase in the what? Purchasing of the raw materials, the price of those material of the products will do what? Increase. That's what we mean by cost push inflation. Now, what are the things that can cause that can lead to increase in the cost of what? Production. We have increase in interest rates on loan. Some persons, if they want to start business, they will go to the bank and borrow what? Money. So when they go to the bank and borrow money and it happens that the interest rate is high, definitely they will do what? Increase the price of the goods they produce in order to do what? Make profits. Another one is increase in the price of imported inputs. You know, some of the raw materials that we use in making some of the products we use in the nation is what? Imported. They are imported. So if the price of those inputs in the foreign nation is what? High. Definitely, if you buy those raw materials and come back, there will be what? Increase in what? Price of goods and services, because you have to make your profit. Now we have another one, devaluation of local currency, excessive government taxes on inputs. You know, we treated tax last time. If the government tax raw materials or the inputs high, after production, what happens? You have to do what? Pass the prices in form of you shift it to the consumer in form of what? Higher prices. So when the government tax high the producers, they will also do what? Increase the price of those products, which the final consumer will bear the burden. Now we have inadequate infrastructure. These are the causes of cost push inflation. When we don't have good roads, you don't have electricity, you spend money in what? In buying fuel. Then for good road, you spend money too in your products, in transporting your products, because some of those products we do what? We spoil before it gets the what? To the point, to the market. Now let's look at the next one. We have open inflation. Open inflation. This type of inflation occurs when there is increase in money supply without an equal increase in the quantity of goods and services supplied. When there is increase in what? Money supply. When there is excess money in circulation. I forgot to tell you, during the period of inflation, there is what? Excess money in what? Circulation. So when there is increase in the supply of what? Money, without an equal increase in the quantity of goods and services supply, that will lead to what? Open inflation. Open inflation, it occurs when there is increase in money supply without an equal increase in the quantity of goods and services being what? Supplied. Now let's look at the final type of inflation. We have a lot of them, but I chose these three. They are the most important ones. We have the demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation. Now, it occurs when there is excess demand with limited what? Supply. When there is excess demand with limited supply. Let's say, for instance, we have in a school, a boarding school like yours, you have 300 students. For instance, you have 300 students and they are meant to purchase what? The school uniform from the what? From the seller. And it happens that the producer produced only 100 school uniforms. And it is compulsory for the students to wear this uniform to the what? Classroom. So what happens? Since we have 200 to what? 300. So in this case, there will be what? Striving. People will be rushing to do what? Demand for that product. It will make the producer to do what? Increase price. Because what? We have more demand than the quantity that is being what? Supplied. More demand than the quantity that is being what? Supplied. That is when the demand for a product increases without a corresponding increase in the supply of what? That product. It is caused by increase in wages and what? Salaries. When you increase wages and salaries, what happens? Everybody wants to purchase those products. They want to buy a particular good. They want to buy this. They want to buy that. So in that case, we now have more people demanding for that product than it is being what? Supplied. Now we have what? Speculation. Speculation. If you assume that in future or in the next 2 weeks that the price of this product will rise, what happens now? People will rush into the market and they will demand more for that product, which we need to what? Demand pulling what? Inflation, thereby making the supply to be small, and we have what? More demand. Now we have increase in government expenditure. If government keeps spending more money, the money they realize from the different source of revenue without matching it with the quantity of goods supply, we are going to have what? Demand pull inflation. Now we have another cause of demand pull inflation. We have war. Let's say, for instance, in a particular state, they are into farming and there is war, and they target that area, and it does, during the period of war, they target mainly industries, agricultural sectors, and the rest of them. So in this case, they will do what? There will be destruction in those what? Agricultural sector, which will lead to what? Excess demand with what? Limited supply. We have increase in bank lending. If the government decide to lend more money to the public, what happens? It will lead to what? Demand pull inflation, whereby we have excess demand with limited supply. Now let's look at the effects of inflation. We have been talking about increase in the price of goods and services. Increase in the price of goods and services. If you check very well, last 2 years, the price of a particular product is not the same price in the market. Now, things keep on increasing and increasing. What are the effects? We have the negative effects. We have the positive what? Effects. Now, let's look at the negative effect first. We have the value of money we do what? Fall. And as I've explained to you that the value of money is the quantity of goods and services a particular amount of money can do what? Can buy. The quantity of goods and services a particular amount of money can do what? Buy. So during inflation, what happens? The value of money will do what? Fall. With your 1,000 naira, you will not purchase much thing from the market. That is what we call that. So in this case, you see that people are likely to lose confidence in money as a means of payment of what? Goods and services, because the quantity of goods they can purchase will do what? Reduce. If you enter the market now with 1,000 and say you want to buy something, my dear, you just get few things and get away. You will not even get what you want from the market. That is the value of money. People, they will not have confidence in using money as a means of buying of goods and what? Services. Now let's look at the second one. It discourages savings. It discourages savings. Now during the time of inflation, what happens? People will save less as a result of what? Fall in the value of assets. They will save less and they will spend more on goods and services due to increase in price. So these people, they will save less. Let's say, for instance, your salary is 30,000 naira. What happens? You will spend more of that your money in the purchasing of what? Goods and services, and you only save small in the bank. That is what we mean by it discourages what? Savings. Now let's look at the third one. We have difficulty in planning. This one affects both the government, both the individual, and both the what? Consumer. Difficulty in what? Planning. Now the government will find it difficult to plan due to what? Increase in their proposed expenditure. You have to make your plan. You make your plan. This is what I want to get. This is what I want to achieve. The government will map out plan on heavy capital projects they want to achieve. And before you know it, what happens? They will enter the market to buy those things they want to do what? Use in accomplishing that, their projects. And it will happen that the price of those goods will do what? Increase. The price of the raw materials will increase, which will do what? They will find it difficult in planning. After planning, they will enter the market and their plan will be what? Frustrated. Now we have the next point. The fixed income earners will suffer during inflation. During inflation, those that their salaries are fixed, what happens? They will suffer. Let's say, for instance, your salary is 20,000 and we have a persistent increase in the price of what? Goods and services. Those people do what? Suffer, because they will still be earning 20,000 naira and they will not get or achieve much with what? That particular amount of what? Money. So that is what we mean by fixed income earners. They will suffer. People will save less as a result of fall in the value of assets and spend more on goods and what? Services due to increase in prices. So it's not good. If there is inflation, you see that many people will be what? Disadvantaged. Now let's look at the last negative effect. It causes balance of payment what? Problems. Balance of payment problems, because the government will spend more money on imports. Remember, if you are importing, what happens? You are paying money to those countries. Let's say, for instance, Nigeria, they are importing from US. What happens? We carry, they are using dollar. You carry 300 and something naira to what? To US. To US, that's their $1, equivalent to our own. So you see that we'll keep on spending much money on importation. So when you talk about inflation, it causes balance of payments what? Problems, because government will spend more money on imports than it receives from what? Exports. We will just export little and we import more because of what? Inflation. It's not good. Now let's look at the positive effects of inflation. As we talk about the negative effects, we look at the what? Positive what? Effects. Now there is increase in revenue. There is increase what? In revenue. Remember that we talked about ways the government generates money. We talked about license. We talked about road tolls. We talked about profit from their industries, like you have the RTC, that's transportation system. You have the Abia line. You have the Abia line ITC. These are government establishments that use money to the what? Government. So they generate revenue from that aspect. So when you talk about the positive effect of inflation, there is increase in revenue, especially the ad valorem what? Taxes. They use much money to the what? Government, because the tax payment increases. So if during the time of inflation, if the tax we are paying is 500 naira, it will no longer be 500 naira, it will increase to either 1,000 or what? 700 naira, because the price of things have what? Risen in the market. That's the positive effect. The government will get more what? Money. That's increase in revenue. Now we have the next one. We have reduction in the burden of debts. Reduction in the burden of debts. Now who are those that gains during inflation? We have the debtors and the borrowers. They gain. Now someone will say, how will they gain? Let's say, for instance, in the year 2005, someone borrowed 10,000 naira from you, and that person is coming back to pay you the money in the year 2020. That money will be useless, because in that year 2010, you can buy 2 bags of rice with what? 10,000 naira. But you cannot buy even a bag of rice with what? That 10,000 naira. So you see that the debtors and the borrowers will gain during inflation, because there is fall in the value of loans to be what? Repaid. They will not struggle. Any little thing they do, they will do what? Get the 10,000 naira and they will pay you. So the debtors and the borrowers, they gain during inflation, because there is fall in the real value of loans to be what? Repaid. Now we have the next one. There is creation of job opportunities. When there is inflation, there is higher perspectives of what? Profit, which leads to what? Increase in the employment of resources and factors of what? Production. So people, there will be increase in the demand for what? Factors of production like land, labor. that we have demand, we have supply. So when you talk about the supply, it's talking about the producers. They want to supply more money, much goods and services during the time of what? Inflation, when the price of goods and services have risen, in order to do what? Make profits. So you see that there is job opportunity, there is creation. There will be more demand for factors of production. When there is more demand for factors of production, they will still demand more for what? Human laborers who will do what? Produce goods and services using those factors of what? Production. Now we have the last one. We have the high profits. There is high profits. Higher price encourage what? Higher outputs, and possibly result in what? Higher profits. Remember, the aim of every businessman is to do what? Make profit. So if there is increase in price, they would like to do what? Supply more of those goods they have, and thereby they will end up what? Making profit. Edward Emmanuel, I hope you are following what we are doing. You can see it very well. Okay, now let's look at how do you control inflation? How do you control? Some people will say, the nation should know what to do. How do you control what? Inflation. Now let's look at this. You have the use of fiscal policy. The use of fiscal policy. Remember when we are talking about public expenditure, we talked about fiscal expenditure, and we talk about fiscal policy and physical policy. Fiscal policy and physical policy. So how will you control inflation? The government can control inflation in the country using what? Fiscal policy, like taxation. Taxation. So if you are an individual, the government will tax you high in order to do what? Reduce your disposable income. When you talk about disposable income, there are those income left after tax has been what? Deducted. So in order to make more, to make people not to demand more for goods and services, the government will do what? Tax high the income of the households and the what? Businessmen. So let's look at the next point. We have use of contractionary or restrictive monetary policy. Use of contractionary or restrictive monetary policy. Now the government can achieve this using what? Open market operation, increasing bank rates, increasing cash deposit ratio, use of special deposits, moral sanction, and funding. The government can use this to reduce the circulation of what? Much money in the country. So the government can decide to use what? To increase bank rates. When they increase bank rates, that is the interest rates, it will discourage much people from coming to the from going to the bank to do what? Borrow money. Now you talk about open market operation, the buying and selling of what? Securities by the central bank. So if there is much money in the country, the government will do what? Sell securities. Now someone will say securities, is it the soldiers? Is it the security men in our houses? No. Securities, example, you have bonds, you have shares, and the rest of them. So if there is inflation, what happens? The government, you remember that I said that open market operation has to do with the buying and selling of what? Securities by the what? Central bank or by the government. So the government will buy, will sell securities to the what? Public in order to do what? Retrieve money from the hands of the what? Individual. Now we have the next one. We have reduction in government expenditure. Reduction in government expenditure. Government should spend less than it receives from different sources of revenue. So it is not expected that when you generate money, you spend more. No, you should spend less of the money that is being what? Generated. So that's what the government should do in order to do what? Reduce or control inflation. So we have another one. We have increase in production. You know, all these ones that I've mentioned, all these control, use of fiscal policy, use of contractionary monetary policy, reduction in government expenditure, they are to solve demand problem. You use these three to solve what? Demand problem. So if you want to solve supply problem, remember that I said that in one of the types of inflation, that is demand pull inflation, you have what? Excess demand with what? Limited supply. So you see that those three controls we've mentioned, the first three, they are to control what? Demand problem. Now let's look at supply problem. If the government wants to control what? Inflation, especially the supply aspect, they should do what? Increase production. So if increase much production of goods and services, what happens? The demand will do what? The price of goods will fall. Let's say, for instance, you have Ukimana, Uko Ifanya. I hope you are listening to me. If you go to your rural markets, I don't know if you follow your mom to the rural markets. If you go to the rural markets, what happens? You see that at times they will carry much goods and services to the what? To the markets. And many people will come with much goods and services. What happens? The price of those goods will fall because we have what? Few people that are what? Demanding for those. So if the government wants to control inflation, what will they do? They will increase production by granting subsidies to what? Producers in order to do what? Increase production. They have to do what? Grant subsidies. Encourage the farmers, give them fertilizers at a lower rate, and the rest of them, you see that we have increase in what? Production. You have mass production. So if you have many people selling goods and services, definitely the price of those goods will fall. The price of those goods will fall. So we have another one, improved infrastructure. If the government can construct more roads, give us good roads, give us electricity, health center, and the rest of them, definitely there will be what? It will stimulate production. And this will reduce the number of what? Middlemen. Why we have so many middlemen coming into what? Play is because the roads are not good. So you see them bridging the gap between the what? Producers and the what? Consumers. So, and when these middlemen are bridging the gap between the consumers and the what? Producers, they will add their transportation fare. They will add the amount of money they spend in going about. Thereby, it will influence in the what? It will reflect in the what? Price of what? Goods and services. And finally, we have the government should discourage importation. The government should discourage the importation of what? Goods and services from countries suffering from what? Inflation. From countries suffering from inflation. So if a particular, let's say the government of this nation, yes, can you tell me those goods they import from other nations? Gift, can you tell me those goods that the government of Nigeria, they import from other nations? Okay? Yes? You can talk about cars. Yes, I can hear someone say cars. Yes. And the rest on. So, if the government discourage the importation of what? Goods from countries suffering from inflation, you see that? Definitely what will happen? We will not experience what? Inflation, because if the price of those goods and services in those nations are high, if we import those goods or the raw materials to the nation, definitely the price of goods will increase, leading to what? Inflation. So far, so good. We've been able to treat inflation. We've been able to treat the meaning of inflation, the types of inflation, the causes of inflation, the effects of inflation, and how to do what? Control inflation. Here is the assignment. You have to explain the ways by which inflation can affect any three functions of money. We've treated money. We've treated money. So, how can inflation affect any three functions of money that you know? You mentioned the functions of money. You explain how inflation affects it. And the second one, you distinguish between cost-push inflation and demand-pull inflation. So thank you for listening and participating. Do the assignment and submit. Bye.